Hi, everybody who's just come in. I know we're officially at our start time right now, but we usually have a couple scragglers, a couple people who come in, within the first, let's say 3 minutes or so. So we're going to give ourselves another couple minutes of just sort of hanging out, uh, introducing ourselves in the chat window if you'd like to, before we officially get started with the webinar. Jack says, generally studying and retention is getting easier as I progress through launch school. So everybody, Jack is in LS 171, and they're reporting that studying is getting easier. So that's great. That was my experience too. As of right now, studying is going well. The thing that's been working well for me is having different techniques for studying to bring more novelty to studying and keeping motivation consistent. I circle through writing markdown files, writing articles, flashcards, doing social media posts, and watching videos for studying. I think that's fantastic. I think like all of these tools can be super useful for studying. And, you might have your favorites or the ones that seem to work the best for you, but really like a lot of them work pretty well. And so if novelty is good for you and you like to have a little bit of variation, I think that's great. Keep things a little bit more fun and interesting. So Daisy says, I asked Daisy about what free recall was. And they're reporting, I think it's similar to active recall, just taking notes or doing the task after learning about it and reviewing what I didn't remember or what I couldn't do. Yeah. Active recall, same thing. I repeated a day, a week, etc., to see what I consistently get wrong, make mistakes in. I think that's great. I think that's a super effective study technique. Then I think I do two of these study kind of tips or whatever. I think they used to be called study tips workshops. Now we have different names for them, but um, in the other one, I talk a lot more about like specific techniques you can use, and we talk a lot about why active recall is a super useful technique. So that one's going to be in a couple weeks from now if you want to watch that one. All right, everybody. Well, okay, there we go. I think we've hit sort of critical mass with everybody who's going to show up. So welcome, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the chat because I can't keep up with it while I'm doing this workshop. But you will be able to communicate with me if you need to, and I'm going to tell you how to do that here in just a minute. But for now, I need to disable that chat. All right. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate y'all coming out or, staying in, as it were. My name is Trevor, and I am a student as well as a teaching assistant here at Launch School. And today we're going to be talking about how to study while working your way through the Launch School curriculum. This is one of many recurring webinars that we host, which are primarily geared towards students enrolled in the prep portion of the curriculum. That said, if you're kind of further along in the curriculum, or even if you're not enrolled yet and you're just sort of curious about what we do here at Launch School, I think you're still going to be able to get something useful out of this. So I do hope that you stick around, even if maybe you're not in prep or whatever. So my goal with this presentation is to share some helpful tips and advice that I personally used to improve my studying that had a really big impact, as well as some of the things that I've seen like other students find success with. I've actually talked to a lot of successful students about how they studied and what works for them and what doesn't. So I'm just trying to share all of that. So hopefully along the way, we're able to identify like maybe some general principles that you can go ahead and take with you to guide your own studying as well. Okay, so now kind of getting into the specifics here, we're going to be covering how to set expectations and goals surrounding your studying, how to structure an individual study session, which study techniques you might want to utilize or at least play with, and how to know when you're ready to tackle a launch school exam. And so before we finish, I'm going to go ahead and circle back to these topics and try to consolidate the most important points into a list of actionable study tips that you can go ahead and take with you. And so before we get started, I should probably tell you all a little bit about myself and my journey here at Launch School. So like I said, my name is Trevor, and I am both a student as well as a teaching assistant here. And I started the prep course like, I don't know, 2 years ago or something like that while working full-time running a small business in a completely unrelated field. And then I eventually transitioned to full-time studying before accepting a position here as a teaching assistant. And prior to starting launch school, I really hadn't participated in any formal education in over a decade, and I'm kind of aging myself there. And when I did, I certainly didn't have the best study habits. So in addition to being like brand new to software development as a field, I also had to teach myself how to study. One of the things you'll often hear from launch school students and graduates is that sort of a secondary benefit of the program is like learning how to learn, or at least learning how to study a topic to the point of mastery. And this has certainly been my experience. And my goal with this presentation is to take some of the things that I've learned throughout that process and then just share them with you. So with that in mind, if at any point I say something that's like confusing or you have questions about, you can feel free to ask me about it using the Q&A feature, and I'll just do my best to clarify. Uh, I had to disable the chat because we have so many people here that it would just be like impossible for me to stay up on top of that chat. But the Q&A should work just fine. Just know that if you do have any questions and you use that Q&A function, I do get a little notification that like blinks and is going to stop what I'm saying, and I'm going to have to read the thing and then answer. And so we will also have some time for like a formal question and answer section at the end of the presentation. So if you have any general questions or comments, I just ask that you save those till the end, right? If you have a specific question that you need me to clarify before I continue, please use the Q&A. Otherwise, we're going to have plenty of time to chat at the end of the talk. Yeah, but like I said, if you feel like your question can wait, it's probably best just to save it till that Q&A. Okay, that's clear. I have about like 45 or 50 minutes worth of content for you today, which means we have plenty of time for questions and comments and all that type of stuff at the end. I'm going to do my best to answer every question that I get asked. So if I can answer it, I'm going to answer it. And I think we'll be able to have a nice discussion at the end. So I hope you stick around for that. Okay. And then one final thing, just if this is your first webinar here, you should know that you're all muted. I can't see you. I can't hear you. And neither can anybody else. It's sort of just me like speaking into the void up here. And I have a general sense that there's people out there listening. But you don't have to have like any paranoia about being seen or heard or eating a snack or something like that. Okay. So unless you have any questions, I think we can officially get started. Cool. Okay. So the first thing I want to mention is that if you're currently enrolled in the prep portion of the curriculum, some of the ways that I discuss the like structure of the curriculum, or even like the specific study tips that I talk about, might not directly apply to you quite yet. While the core curriculum is really linear in how it's structured, and there are like really clearly defined concepts and skills that you need to master before you move on from one portion to the next, the prep portion of the curriculum isn't really structured in that same way. Prep is like a little bit more like a collection of resources that are designed to orient you to launch school and to software development more generally. There are some really great materials in there that cover important foundational concepts in programming, and you should take your time to work through all of those. That said, the learning that happens in prep isn't like mastery based in the same way that the learning that happens in the core curriculum is. So some of the study tips that I cover in this talk might not directly apply to the prep portion as much as they apply to the core curriculum. So it's definitely important to learn the material in prep. That's not what I'm saying. You're welcome to use like a mastery-based approach if you feel like that's really going to benefit you. But just know that it's kind of okay to go through the prep materials in a timely fashion. And when you feel ready to sort of tackle mastery-based learning, just go ahead and sign up for the core curriculum. If you're worried about retaining like 100% of the prep material, know that a lot of it is going to be reinforced in the core curriculum. And you can always go back and reference the prep materials if you need to. So just kind of keep that in mind. So with all that said, let's talk about what you can actually expect when you do choose to sign up for the core curriculum. So setting appropriate expectations is super important and often overlooked whenever you're starting like a new project or endeavor, because it allows you to know what you're getting into and ensures that you're not caught off guard by the reality of this thing that you just signed up for. So with that in mind, we should take a moment to appreciate the fact that the very clear stated goal of Launch School is to produce professional software engineers that have mastered the fundamentals of software development. And like, honestly, the depth of the material and the difficulty of the assessments reflect that goal. So personally, my previous experiences with formal education left me unprepared for that degree of educational rigor. In high school and college, I would like more or less do the bare minimum amount of studying I needed to do to reach a level of understanding where I could sort of look at a topic and I could say to myself, like, yeah, okay, I think I get that, you know? And then I just rely on being a pretty decent test taker to pass my exams. And just to be honest and transparent here, that approach would not work for me here at Launch School. Because the launch school assessments require such a high degree of precision, having that sort of like casual understanding of the topics isn't enough. You're going to be expected to understand these foundational programming concepts well enough to discuss and demonstrate them clearly and precisely in a timed interview or exam setting. So additionally, assessments are graded in such a way that anything less than an A is likely to be met with a conditional pass or not yet. And so that means that unless you score at least like a 90%, give or take, on an exam, there are very likely to be additional steps for you to take before moving past that exam, up to and including a mandatory waiting period and a retake. So now for most people, exams and interviews are stressful and you're prone to make like small mistakes that you would make in a different setting. And so that means that you really need to over prepare for an assessment if you intend to receive a passing grade on your first attempt. All right, so that's all the intimidating stuff. Let me give you the good news. Everything that you need to know in order to ace an assessment is covered in the material. And the study guides that are all provided to you at the end of a course do a great job of outlining the topics that are going to be covered on that exam. Also, you can like take exams on your own schedule. So you never have to go into an assessment before you feel like 100% totally prepared. Additionally, there aren't any like gotcha questions on the test or anything like that. So if you know the material and you base your studying on the study guides, you are going to do well. That's just how it works. Beyond that, you have a lot of resources at your disposal. You can ask questions to the instructors and the TAs. You can attend all these weekly study sessions that we have, and you can post in the community Slack channel. And then finally, the curriculum is designed in such a way that you never get totally like in over your head on a topic. Information is always going to be presented in a way that's appropriate for your current level of knowledge, and topics build on top of one another. So within that context, the role of exams is really to work as like a natural roadblock that just ensure you're building your knowledge on a solid foundation before you move forward. And again, if you kind of get stuck at any point during that process, you do have a ton of tools at your disposal that can help you get unstuck. So all that to say, like if you expect to speed run the curriculum and only read things one time and sort of get through without any active studying, you're going to have a really tough time. But if you come in knowing that it's going to be tough but doable, and you're going to have to actively study, and that you'll likely have to take advantage of some of these resources that are at your disposal, you can expect to do great. Okay, so now that our expectations are sort of oriented in the right place, we can talk about actually studying some setting some concrete study goals. So broadly speaking, goals can be separated into two categories. You have outcome-oriented goals and you have process-oriented goals. So outcome-oriented goals are things like, I'm going to complete this particular course in 3 weeks, or, like, oh, my goal is to get an A on the next assessment, or, like, I'm going to get a 6-figure software developer job, right? While process-oriented goals might be things like I'm going to do 20 hours of focused studying next week, or I'm going to read each lesson a total of 3 times. Oops, slide that over. Or I'm going to complete each practice problem at least once. Maybe you could say like, I'm going to develop my own kind of study guide, or I'm going to continue studying until I can teach this material to someone else. And in general, setting process-oriented goals is going to work way better for you during your time in core. This is because process-oriented goals are actually actionable and exist almost entirely within the realm of your control, while outcome-oriented goals, while like totally fine and attractive in theory, actually do very little to direct your behavior. Beyond that, some outcome-oriented goals can actually even work against you. I've seen this happen time and time again with people. So here's an example. You could sort of imagine setting a goal to complete this one course, like let's say RB 101. You're going to complete this in 3 weeks, no matter what. That's your goal. Like that's a really great way to make yourself brush over the material and let yourself be satisfied with like that good enough level of understanding that we talked about before. And more often than not, this is going to backfire when you get a not yet on an exam and you need to wait to take your retest, right? So like suddenly this goal that you set in order to like increase the speed at which you complete the course is the exact reason you have additional steps to take before you're able to move forward. So just as a note here, what you see on this process-oriented list are some of my personal study goals for each course. You don't have to do all of them. That's not a rule or anything like that. Honestly, you don't have to do any of them. They're just things that work for me, and so they might kind of work for you too. So that's why I put them up there. All right. So we have our expectations in the right place and our study goals are established. We took the time to kind of sit down what our process-oriented goals would be. Well, that means it's probably time to, I don't know, sit down and actually study something. So like on a session by session basis, what exactly does that look like, right? Well, in short, setting up a successful study session comes down to putting yourself in a position where you can focus on the material without distractions and interruptions. So here's some tools to do that because that's easier said than done, right? So the first thing is that I recommend setting up a dedicated study spot in your home where you do your studying and you take your exams. So this spot should be like clean and free from distractions. So like no dirty dishes on your desk, no piles of random papers, no cell phones sitting face up on the desk, all that type of stuff. If at all possible, it should be somewhere that you sort of like only or mostly use for studying. So probably not your bed or the spot where you hang out and watch TV at night. From there, you're going to want to decide if you're like a silence person or a music person when you study. If you choose music, you probably want it to be instrumental music, so no vocals at all, played at a volume that allows it to fade into the background and allows you to focus on your work. You're going to notice that I didn't list like TV or podcasts as viable sources of background sounds. And I guess this is actually a little bit controversial. I know that there are some people who have effectively used those things as sources of background noise while they study, and I know this because those people have pushed back to me on this point previously. But in my personal experience and in my reading of the literature, because there is research on this stuff, like I think whether you're consciously aware of it or not, those things have a very high likelihood of distracting you and just detracting from your overall effectiveness of your study session. That said, you got to do what works for you. So feel free to experiment with that stuff, I suppose. Just try to be objective and honest about whether something is actually helping you or you just sort of find it comforting and familiar. And if it's that second one and it's not actually helping you, maybe you try silence or some instrumental music or something like that. Okay, so while you're studying, I recommend timing yourself as a way to keep yourself accountable to your process-oriented goals. There are a ton of different apps that are available for this. I'm sure if you type in study timer into the app store, you'll get 1,000 recommendations. Or you can just be like an old man like me and use a stopwatch and a spreadsheet. That's literally what I do. I also recommend taking breaks during your study sessions, which you can do either at predetermined intervals or whenever you feel your focus and productivity significantly drop off. The research is super clear that those intra-session breaks strongly improve learning outcomes. Not a little bit, a lot. So don't feel like taking breaks means that you're lazy or you can't focus or something like that. It's just a really effective technique to get more out of your study sessions. So go ahead and use them. Uh, Personally, I utilize something called the Pomodoro technique, which involves focused, intense studying for 25 minutes, followed by like a 5 minute or maybe sometimes shorter break. And I string together 4 of these to make a block. And then I set a goal for the number of blocks I'm going to complete every week. So I might say I'm going to do 10 blocks or 12 blocks or whatever it might be. And the benefit of this technique is that it allows me to maintain a very high level of focus during those 25 minutes because I know I only have to focus for 25 minutes. Uh, Additionally, breaking your study session up like this reduces the energy barrier to actually start studying because each study session is super short, right? Like it's way easier to tell yourself, like, all right, I just need to sit down and focus for 25 minutes than it is to convince yourself, like, I guess it's time to start my 5 hours of daily studying. Um, so particularly if you find yourself procrastinating, utilizing these kind of shorter study intervals can be a really useful technique. Just say, hey, I got 25 minutes and then I get to take a break again. And you're going to pick up momentum, you're going to reduce that energy barrier, and you're actually going to start studying, which oftentimes is the most important part. So that said, some people do prefer longer study intervals and longer breaks. That's totally fine too. The real key is that during your studying, you are studying, and during your breaks, you are taking a break. So don't sort of just like intermittently check your emails or hop on social media during your study session and then declare it a break after the fact. That's actually not taking a break. It's just being distracted, is what that's called. It's a totally different thing, and it has a totally different effect on learning outcomes. So make sure those things are separate, and you're not just sort of letting yourself be distracted and being like, it was a break. No, it wasn't. You just got distracted. Uh, so in addition to breaks, sometimes your brain really just needs to focus on a different task, right? So particularly in like your earlier courses, you have a lot of written and lecture-based material, and you also have a lot of coding questions that you're allowed to work through. And I know that personally, like there's only so much reading about like variable scoping rules that I can do in any given day. So I found that when I hit my personal limit for like that type of conceptual learning, uh, I just have this feeling where it's hard for me to focus and nothing new is really going in or being retained. I could easily switch to sort of the practical learning of solving the practice problems. And this helped me keep my studying a lot more fun and effective while still reaching my time-based goals for the day. Okay, so I always forget I put this slide in. So what you currently see on the screen is a visual representation of one of my own study sessions. My wife actually took this picture while I was studying for my first ever launch school exam. That's actually what's happening in the picture. And I included this slide because I think it's a really nice demonstration of some of the things that I personally do well during study sessions, as well as some of the things that I struggle with. So let's kind of start by like looking at some of the things that I'm doing well here. Okay, so the first thing is I actually have a dedicated study and exam area. Uh, this little weird nook in my apartment was totally unused. We just had it empty, right? And so when I just signed up for law school, I actually bought this cheap little desk at Target and a cheap little chair, and I just threw it in the corner there. And I said, "This is my study nook." And I only would ever study there, and I took my exams there and all that type of stuff until we moved. And this was super useful for me as somebody who procrastinates because what it did is it had this effect where I would have a really hard time starting my study session. But there was something about this psychological trigger of sitting in my chair and opening my computer at my desk. It just meant study time. I knew I wasn't checking my emails. I knew I wasn't going on Reddit or whatever. Like it made it way easier to have this dedicated spot because all I had to do was I had to sit in the chair. And if I was sitting in the chair, I was studying. And sitting in the chair is a lot easier than actually starting studying. And so it's kind of got the ball rolling in that way. So I found that really, really useful. Okay. Number two, you can tell that I'm actually pretty focused. My cat is being silly and adorable and sitting with a big pot belly like a guy on a couch, and I am not at all distracted by that. I am clued in on my work. Uh, to assist with that, it's hard to see, but I actually do have earbuds in. So I'm definitely a music person when I study, particularly if my cats are running around being silly or my wife is home. And so I need to kind of block out the world. Some instrumental music in headphones can be really useful for that. Additionally, hard to see here, but I do have my timer out on my desk. I have my little digital timer that I started from using from the beginning, and I'm using the Pomodoro technique again to keep me focused, to reduce that energy barrier of starting studying, and then also to keep me accountable to those process-oriented goals I have. So that's all the stuff I do really well when I study. Let's look at the bad stuff. My desk is a disaster, as you can see in all of those places. Like I have like dirty clothes and like dishes and a water bottle and stacks of paper, like bills and stuff. And that's not so good. And I have experimented with this. Like I have kept my desk really clean or taken 2 minutes before my study sessions to actually clean my desk. And at least subjectively, I don't have a way to measure this in any kind of real way. It really makes an impact on my ability to kind of focus on what I'm doing. And yet I still can't do it. We're all human. So what do you want? But that is something that I could do better. And so I encourage you to do that better too, to the extent that you can. Okay. All right. So we're sitting in our dedicated study spot, our little apartment nook or whatever it is. We turned off our phone. We closed all those extra browser windows that we always have open and never return to. And we reach over to our timer and we start our first 25-minute or like however long chunk of studying. What do we actually do here? Well, when it comes to study techniques, I really wish I had like this super secret knowledge I could share with you. This one thing you should do that would fix all of the studying problems. But like honestly, I think they're going to depend a lot on personal preferences And it's just going to take some experimentation for you to find the techniques that you enjoy and that you find the most beneficial. I have a question right now. I'm going to read it, and I might answer it now, or I might answer it in a second. Give me 1 second to see here. Okay, Mustafa, I'm going to leave that open, and I'm going to answer that at the very end, okay, so that we don't lose the flow here of the presentation. Okay, so in any case, study techniques. I wish I had the one secret study technique you got to do that's going to fix everything. I don't think it works like that. I've read a lot of research on this stuff. I've talked to a lot of students, and I'm always surprised at the different things that people find useful, right? There's not one thing that everybody has to do, okay? So that's maybe encouraging or is maybe discouraging depending on your perspective. All that said, I do think we can talk about what effective studying looks like in a general sense. And that's maybe going to help us kind of guide our decision-making process a little bit, because you do have to pick and choose a few different things. So in general, when you dig into the research on successful studying and learning, you repeatedly see the following 3 elements: building an understanding, repeated exposure and practice, and active recall and elaboration. And just to be clear here, like, these aren't terms that show up in the scientific literature as far as I know, or at least not categories that show up. They're just sort of my own way of categorizing all of the things that I've seen and read and heard of. So of course, they're not perfect categories. Like, there's probably a fair bit of overlap between them. And, you know, you can probably squint and kind of look at each technique and say, it sort of fits in that one too. It also is sort of that category. But as sort of like a general lens through which to view all these various study tactics, I think is a pretty good place for us to start. So let's kind of look at these general categories and sort of see which study techniques sort of fit within them, okay? So probably the first goal when you actually start studying a new topic is to gain an understanding of like all of these fundamental concepts and terms, right? You really can't learn something deeply if you're not familiar with like the core underpinnings and the terminology and all of that sort of stuff. So I think that's sort of step number 1. So under this heading are going to be techniques that can get you to a point where you can look at a concept like, I don't know, variable scope or something like that. And you can say to yourself like, oh yeah, okay, like I get that. You know what I mean? I know what that is. I get it. That doesn't mean you've mastered it, and it certainly doesn't mean that you're ready to be tested on it, but it is a pretty good place to start. So some techniques that can help you kind of get to that category are reading the text and watching the videos. Go figure. I'll just say as a little side note here, you're probably going to have to do that more than once. I have yet to meet a person who has said, nope, I can read a lesson once and I totally understand it and I learned everything. So if you're finding yourself repeatedly, oh man, I kind of get that, and then you got to read it 2 or 3 more times, totally okay, totally normal. Okay, asking questions or discussing the concepts with someone new. So let's say that you read the text, you watch the video a couple times, you still don't really get it. It can be helpful to reach out to a TA or an instructor or even another student and sort of like talk through that with somebody. A lot of times those people are able to fill in gaps or explain things in a way that makes a little bit more sense to you personally. Another thing that can help here is making flashcards. And the reason that's useful is because it forces you to identify what's important in the material that you're reading. You read something and you see this term you've never heard before, you have to pick that out, you write it on the front side, and then on the back side, you kind of define it. That's a very classic way to make a flashcard. And so that alone can help you build an understanding, is identifying those crucial sort of linchpin concepts. Writing summaries of the material, same sort of thing. If you summarize something, you have to identify what's important, right? So you have to take what you read and sort of consolidate it. And in that, you build a pretty good understanding of it. And then finally, drawing an idea web in some cases can be useful. I wouldn't try to force this on yourself. Like if what you're learning about or reading about doesn't naturally lend itself to an idea web, I wouldn't try to draw one. But sometimes when you're reading about all of these disparate ideas and concepts, and you kind of have this general sense that these things are connected, but you don't understand how or why exactly, it can be useful to sort of visually represent that in an idea web. And once you see that they're connected, the kind of the understanding sort of like comes into a little bit more focus for you. Okay, so those are the things that are going to get you to that first layer of understanding, and that's a really good start. Once you have that solid understanding in place, you're going to want to reinforce it through just repetition and practice. So on the repetition side, like, our goal is really just retention of that information. And then on the practice side, the goal is to become proficient at actually applying the information in the way that matters to you. So techniques that fit underneath this category are like using your flashcards. You already took the time to write it all out. So maybe, for a couple minutes each study session, you go through and you just get that repeated exposure by checking your flashcards and testing yourself. You can also read your own summaries. That can be useful because A, it's shorter, right, than the source material, and so it doesn't take as long to kind of get refreshed on it. But also, like, you put it in your own words and you explained it in a way that made sense to you as you were writing it. And so sometimes that can be useful to go back and reread that instead of going directly to the source material. You can write mini articles about the topics on the study guide. I call this a form of practice, really, because, okay, here's a super secret inside tip. That's sort of what happens on a lot of the exam questions. Like it's gonna say, hey, talk about, these variable scoping rules or explain this concept. And so if you can sit down and write a little topic or an article about those topics, like that's a really good form of practice for the exams. Okay. Completing the practice problems. The clue is in the name on that one. That is a form of practice. Very important to do. Do all of them multiple times. And then finally, coding in front of someone else. This last one is something that people overlook, myself included, before my first interview assessment. And I actually lost points on my non-technical grade because of it. So it turns out that coding in front of someone else, particularly where you're actually talking through what you're doing and your logic and why you're putting this piece of code here, is a totally unique skill. And doing it all in your head by yourself without an audience feels really similar until you do the other version and you go, oh, this is totally different. And so you need to practice that skill before you're tested on it. And during the interview assessments, that's what's happening. Okay. And so take the time to talk about code in front of your fellow students. Maybe go to a TA-led study session and do it in front of a TA. Talk about your logic and actually write code in front of other people before you get to those interview assessments, because it's a really important skill to practice. Okay, so honestly, if you spend enough time with all of those techniques, like, you'll probably have a really good understanding of the material, and maybe you're even ready for the exam if you do all of that stuff. Like, you did pretty good. However, to do really well on the exams, particularly within the context of managing your time limits, you have to be confident in your ability to actually demonstrate that understanding that you built without a lot of like processing or conscious effort. It needs to be almost automatic. You need to really have it in there. And then kind of beyond that, like, if you want to reach a point of what you might call true mastery, you have to be able to do more than just repeat the stuff that you've learned from other people. Ideally, you want to arrive at a place where you can think about and discuss the concepts that you've learned in like new or unique ways. That's real mastery, in my opinion. And so some things that can actually help you in this department are quizzes, which you're like, what? Well, quizzes are a form of active recall. They prompt you to recall the things that you've just learned in the previous lesson. And so you can take these quizzes over and over and over and over and over again, right? Note that the quizzes also are a learning tool. They are not a testing tool. So you can fail all of the quizzes, and it does not matter for your admittance into capstone or anything like that. The only thing that really matters are from a grade perspective are the exams. Okay. So go ahead and just take those over and over again. You can give impromptu lectures. So you can find a friend or, your cat or a rubber duck or whoever, maybe another student. And a really fun thing, particularly if you have another student, you can pick the topic for them and they can pick a topic for you, and you have to give them a lecture about that. That's a really good way to have to recall a lot of information and sort of elaborate and explain things in your own words. You can come up with your own analogies and examples. I find this really useful for when you're taking notes or you're writing your summaries. Don't just copy the analogies and the examples that are in the text. Like, come up with your own. And then you can also write your own exam questions and practice problems and then go on to solve them. Okay. And then finally, I think like sort of the pinnacle of this mountain is that you could take these concepts and you could actually teach them to someone else. So again, really useful to set up for study sessions, either formal ones with TAs where you're going to have to talk through some of this stuff, or informal study sessions. You can kind of find other students in Slack and sort of teach these things to each other. Because if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I don't really understand, like, the variable scoping rules with methods. Like, why can I not access this variable right now? and you have to then teach it to them in a way that now they understand it. That, in my opinion, is sort of the peak of the mountain with being able to like elaborate on these concepts. Okay, so a couple points before I want to make before we move on here. So first, like I know that I presented this as kind of a compartmentalized, like linear process, but I don't actually think learning works that way. Like obviously, writing articles about a topic on a study guide is going to help you like understand those topics, and so it's sort of this one over here. And then maybe drawing an idea web might help you think about the concepts in new and unique ways. You know, like so maybe it's over here. Um, all that to say, like these things really have a lot of overlap between them, right? You're probably engaging sort of similar neural pathways and getting similar benefits just in different ways with these different techniques. So I don't want you to think, okay, I'm going to start studying a new topic and say to yourself, like, I need to do the things in this first category. And then after I've done all of those things, I'm going to go over here and do the things, all of these in this category. And then I'm going to do all of them in this category. Like, I think effective studying is always going to be like more of an iterative process than that, where you sort of go over the same material multiple times in multiple different ways using multiple different techniques. And in that process, your understanding deepens, your retention of the material improves, and your ability to elaborate on and actively recall it increases. And then secondly, the last thing I want to say before we move on here is simply, I don't want you to feel like you need to use all of these techniques. I certainly don't, not even close, honestly. While I do think it's probably a good idea to use techniques from each of these different categories, it's sort of to ensure all of your bases are covered. I just want to kind of give you a whole bunch of ideas that you could experiment with so you can sort of find what works for you. With that said, if anyone out there has a study technique that you personally find particularly beneficial, and maybe I didn't list it on this slide, why don't you go ahead and share that with me using the Q&A function? And then in just a couple of minutes, I'll pass those suggestions along to everyone else, just so we have even more ideas. Okay, so if anybody has a technique that they use that I did not put on this slide, share it in the Q&A. I'll pass it along to people. And while everybody's sort of thinking about that and trying to find their own technique that they used, I'm going to share with you my own total approach to studying, which is like super bare bones, but does include a couple different techniques that I personally find useful. Okay, so I'm just going to talk through what I personally did while studying through launch school here. First note here, for those of you, I realize if you're in prep, you might not have a total clear understanding of how the courses are structured. So when I say a lesson versus an assignment, you might not know what I'm talking about. And so that's what this visual on the slide here is for. So you can kind of think of courses structured like a course would be something like RB 101. A course has multiple lessons. Each lesson has multiple assignments, which is a thing you click on, and there's stuff to read and stuff to answer, problems to answer, and videos to watch and stuff like that. And after a certain number of assignments, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe more, there will be a quiz, which just covers the material from that lesson. And then you move on to the next lesson. Okay, so that's that. At the end of the course, so after all of those lessons with the assignments and the quizzes, there's a little study guide that tells you, hey, this is the stuff that's going to be on the test. You should really be pretty comfortable with this material. And then there's a test. Okay, so just so you can kind of visualize the structure here. Anyways, so like I said earlier, I use the Pomodoro technique, which means that I study intensely for 25 minutes, and then I take like a 5-minute or a shorter break. I string together 4 of those into something I call a block, and then I basically aim to complete 2 or 3 blocks most days of the week. So all of what I'm about to describe happens within the context of that overall study format. Okay, so typically I take 3 total passes through the material. First, I go through a single lesson, like in this example, lesson 1, just to gain a lay of the land. This is really just like a cursory reading of the material to gain a basic level of exposure. So I just read assignment 1, I read assignment 2, I read assignment 3. Just dun, 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 1, 2, 3. I then take the quiz, and I usually do pretty terrible, to be honest. I kind of bomb out on the quiz because all I did was read it. So then what I do is I go back through the entire lesson again with the intention of actually mastering the material this time. And so on the second pass, what I do is I divide things up by assignment rather than by looking at that whole lesson. And by what I mean by that is that I first read the assignment. So in this case, assignment 1. And then as soon as I'm done reading it, I write a long form summary of it in my own words. So all of the content from that assignment, I write a summary, and I try to include my own coding examples and my own analogies in those in that summary. So then I get to the end of that. So I do that for every assignment. I'll do that for assignment 1, read, summary, assignment 2, read, summary, assignment 3, read, summary. When I get to the end of the lesson, I get to that quiz again. I take it again, and lo and behold, I usually do way better that time. Go figure. So once I do that for every lesson, like in the RB 101, I would do that for lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3. I go through that whole process where I go through each lesson kind of twice. I go through the study guide and I answer sort of the questions, or I write articles about all of the topics that it includes. And again, I just do that long form in writing. I just type it away in a big old Google document. I then, after I've done that, I finish by doing a third pass through the entire course. So now I literally just read lesson 1, assignment 1, lesson 1, assignment 2, lesson 1, assignment 3, do the quiz, lesson 2, assignment 1, lesson 2, assignment 2, lesson 2, assignment 3. I just sit there and I read them for this third time through. And essentially what I'm doing is that I'm just ensuring that I don't learn anything new or come across anything that I don't understand. Along the way, I do a third attempt at those quizzes. And at this point, I really should get an easy 100% on those quizzes, right? And then prior to the exam, I do one final pass through all of my own summaries and my answers to the study guide questions. So everything that I've written now, I now sit down and I go through that. And I do that just to make sure that my explanations of the concepts are fresh into my mind as I go into the exam, because I want to go into the exam with my own words in ways that I was able to explain things that in a way that made sense to me when I read them. I don't want to just go with the curriculum's direct words in my mind. Okay. So really, my approach is pretty simple, and I don't rely on like a lot of fancy tools or techniques. I don't use an app. I don't do flashcards or anything like that. It's really just intense focus with these like planned intermittent breaks, repetition, a lot of repetition, and then like long form summaries of the material, along with all of the provided exercises, quizzes, and study guides to test and reinforce my understanding. So again, that's just my personal approach. It's totally fine if yours is different. I think there's a lot of ways to be successful here at launch school based off of all the people I've talked to. I found one that seems to work pretty well for me, and it'll probably just take a bit of experimentation for you to find one that works for you, and that's totally normal and totally okay. So with that in mind, I don't think anybody gave me an additional suggestion that I did not put on that last slide, which is great. Let me just double check. No, that must have been the most thorough study technique slide in the world. Okay, so great. That's how you study for stuff. But no matter the studying approach that you take, you're likely to reach a point where you sort of think, hey, I think maybe I'm ready to take this assessment, right? But I don't know. And after I had that experience a couple times, I developed the following checklist to see if I'm actually ready to take an exam, because I had to talk myself into taking them a lot of times. Like, I don't think this is like a perfect or definitive list or anything like that. And it's not coming down from launch school officials. This is just what I wrote for myself. But making sure I follow everything on this checklist has actually allowed me to go into exams feeling a lot more confident. And so I just want to kind of share this with you guys. I think there's like 7 or 8 points or something like on here. Okay. So here's my sort of like, am I assessment ready checklist? Okay, so the first thing is like, have I actually read all of the material more than once? Like you'll find that when you get into these lessons sometimes, like there's going to be links to other articles. There's going to say, hey, now you have to go read this like textbook about it, like a launch school provided textbook. Like there's a lot of material. Have I read all of it more than once? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, I continue on. Have I answered all of the practice problems at least one time? Now I put at least there because some of the practice problems are pretty straightforward. You know the answer, you bang out the answers, it's no big deal. But you're gonna find, if you're anything like me, that some of them are either a little bit more challenging, they kind of take you a while to sort of get it, or you come up with an answer, but you're not super satisfied with the answer. You're like, oh, I don't know if I could do that again, or man, that took me a really long time, or whatever it is. Or you come up with your own answer, and then you look at the launch school kind of provided answer, and you're like, oh man, there's way better. What the heck? In cases like that, what I would recommend that you do is that you actually just earmark that and you just make a note of that somewhere in your notes and you say, there's more to learn with that topic or that practice problem. And at some point, you just sort of like go back through those and you try to do those again. I think that can be a really useful tool that a lot of people overlook. So anyways, but at minimum, you're going to answer all the practice problems at least once. If so, I go ahead and I move forward. Have I practiced summarizing the material in my own words? Have I written summaries? Have I answered questions? Yes or no? Because it's not enough to just consume the information. You actually have to be able to recall and put it into words and articulate the information. So yes or no, have I done all of that for all of the material? If yes, I move on. Have I gotten 100% on every quiz? The big caveat here is I already told you I sort of bomb out. I do terrible on the quizzes the first time. I don't mean the first time. I don't mean my recorded answer. I mean that if I were to take that quiz right now, it would be an easy 100%. I know the answer. I understand the answers for each of those. Yes or no? Because another super secret tip, if it's on the quiz, it might be on the exam. Okay, next one. Can you confidently discuss every topic on the study guide? So like I said, Launch School provides these study guides, and we're going to tell you like, hey, understand, polymorphism. If we're talking about like, the object-oriented lessons, understand, interface inheritance. If I can't sit down and talk to somebody about polymorphism or interface inheritance, I'm going to have a tough time on this exam. So can I confidently discuss every topic on the study guide? Yes or no? If it's yes, I move on. Have I gone through the material a final time and not learned anything new? So this one, I've gotten pushback on this. People say it's a waste of time. I find it very comforting. And I'll be honest with you, it's going to take you a lot of time to get through a lot. Like RB 101 might take you months to get through. But if you get through it and you really study it and you write your summaries and you take your notes and you learn the material, you can sit down and read the material in RB 101 and go through all of it in like one study session, like in a couple hours. Like it's not actually that much, not that many words. And so taking that final time to just go through and be like, yep, I knew all that. I got that. Nothing new here. I know all this stuff. That can be really helpful before you go into exam. And every once in a while, you're going to go, wait, what is that? What is that weird corner example? Oh man, I missed that before. And then you can fill in those gaps. So I do recommend that people do that. And then finally, for interviews, we already talked about this. Have you actually practiced answering coding questions in front of people? Don't let the interview be your first time doing that because you're going to lose points. It's just how it works. Okay. So practice answering questions, conceptual questions and coding questions in front of people before you get to the interview. If you've done all of that stuff, you're probably as ready as you're going to be. So you might as well take the exam. Okay. This is our last slide here, everybody. So now that we've looked at studying in some degree of detail, it's our last content slide. I got a little summary stuff in the end. Anyways, we've looked at studying in some detail. I do want to fulfill the promise that I made at the beginning of this workshop and kind of actually provide you with a list of totally actionable tips that can help guide your studying while you're here at Launch School. Okay, so here's our 8 tips. Okay, number 1, have the appropriate expectations. Know that you're going to have to go through the material more than once. Totally normal. You're going to have to actively develop a deep level of understanding of these topics, and that you're going to have to practice expressing that understanding with clarity and precision. That said, know that this is something that you can do, and you should expect to be successful if you put in that work. Number 2, trust the curriculum and focus on the material provided. I don't know if I've said this explicitly, but I've sort of alluded to it. It's super easy to get distracted and to allow your curiosity to lead you astray. The curriculum does a really good job of presenting information in the way that you need to know it at a particular point in your learning journey. So don't go down rabbit holes and start reaching for a ton of outside materials. It can be super tempting to do that, and curiosity is good, but more often than not, you're just going to lead yourself astray. So just trust the curriculum and focus on all the stuff that we're providing for you. Number 3, set process-oriented goals for yourself. These are likely going to center around the amount of time or the number of days that you spend studying, maybe the number of times you complete each question or you review the material, or maybe it's like the number of study sessions you attend, whatever you think would help. Basically, just come up with a list of behaviors that you think a successful person would have, and then you just work every day to execute on those behaviors. That's the type of goal you want to have. Number 4, set yourself up for success during each and every study session. Okay, make the most of them. We all have busy lives and we can't study all day every day, so you might as well make the most of your study time. Get rid of your distractions. Focus on the task at hand and take breaks or change your focus when you need to. Okay. Don't just sloppily, half-heartedly study all the time. It's no good. Okay, number 5, find study techniques that actually work for you. Okay, understanding the material and retaining that information is the name of the game here. So how you achieve those things is largely a matter of preference. So feel free to experiment until you find what works and what you like and what is sustainable for you. Okay. Number 6, take advantage of the resources available to you. Ask questions, request code reviews, and attend those study sessions. They're there. If you join the curriculum, it's a part of the curriculum. You're paying for it. You might as well take advantage of it. Number 7, over prepare for your exams. Exams all happen on your own schedule. So there's no reason to take one before you know certainly that you're ready. Go through the study guide, read the material multiple times, summarize things in your own words, and practice answering those coding questions. If anything seems like a little bit fuzzy or unclear during any point in that process, you have all the time you need to clear it up before you get to the exam. And number 8, have fun. Look, this isn't something that I touched on very much during the talk, but I do think that it's really important. Look, like I know all of this is kind of intimidating. And doing new stuff is like always at least a little bit stressful, right? Honestly, for me, like there have been times where studying has felt really difficult. And I've even thought that maybe like I can't do this, I can't learn this stuff. But there have also been times where a difficult concept just sort of like clicks after you've been looking at it for a little while, or, maybe I finally fix a bug in my program and then everything suddenly works the way I want it to. Like those times can be a lot of fun and feel really good. In my personal opinion, it's okay to live in both of those worlds a little bit, right? Like you can know that this is going to be a lot of hard work, but still try to enjoy the process. You can explore and experiment. You can be kind of curious and creative. You can reach out to the community or just do whatever you can to let this be a fun, enjoyable learning experience, because I promise it really can be. Okay, so before I open up the floor to questions here, there are just a few study-related resources here at Launch School that I'd like to draw your attention to and just invite you to check out if you don't know about them. First, we have our live TA-led study sessions. They are mostly geared towards students in the core curriculum, but there are a few of them in the prep students if you want to check them out. You can head over to the events page on the Launch School website to see announcements about all of the upcoming study groups that we have. Just check those out if you haven't. Next, we have Slack. Super great place for you to ask questions about any topics that you might be finding particularly difficult, or you're just sort of getting stuck on and you just want to talk about. You can find instructions for signing up for Slack at launchschool.com/chat. We also have our Launch School GatherTown space, which is this sort of like quirky, interactive virtual study space where you can collaborate with other students or just like access some helpful study tools. Like you get access to open coder pads and whiteboards and cool stuff like that. It's actually kind of cool and like open to everybody, including prep students. And you basically sign up for this, like you're this little 8-bit character, like virtual guy, and you can like walk around and talk to people and use coder pads and stuff like that. And so I encourage you to check it out. You can do that by going to launchschool.com/resources and then scrolling down to the gather heading. You click on that and it'll tell you how to sign up. Don't have to download or anything or install or anything like that. You can just kind of hop in. It's pretty cool. And then finally, of course, once you wrap up your time in prep, you're feeling kind of ready to take on this mastery-based learning, I do encourage you to sign up for the core curriculum. Maybe I'm biased, I'm a company man, I guess, but I legitimately do think it's an excellent program. And it is certainly the best resources that I've ever personally used with regards to learning software development. So if you found the prep materials useful or even just interesting, like I do encourage you to continue on and just sign up for core. Okay. Alrighty. Thank you very much, everybody. Do we have any questions or comments? The other thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to click this link while a few of those come in here. We have a couple questions. I'm going to let a couple of them sign up here. And while we're getting those, I am going to post in the chat. I have a little link for a feedback form. And so if you click on this and spend 5 minutes, not even 5 minutes, you spend 2 minutes filling this out, I'd really appreciate it. It's basically a form that I'm going to look at and a few other people at Launch School are going to look at that we're going to use to make these workshops better. So just tell me how I did and what I could have done better, okay? Thanks. You can click on that link there in the chat. Okay, Q&A. Okay. Mustafa says, I have a full-time job and studying law school part-time. Been there. It is really difficult to do both. Yes, it is. For some periods, my studying slows down, resulting in less study hours every day until I skip studying completely for the day. It becomes really difficult to get on my feet and catch that routine again. Do you have any tips for students like me? Yep, I got a couple. Okay, so this is all I can draw from personal experience here. Um, the first thing is give yourself a little bit of grace. Like missing a day of studying doesn't mean you're a failure and you lost everything and you'll never complete it or anything like that. It's just something that happens. And so, I think sometimes we can get in our own heads about this stuff. We just set this big lofty goal where I'm going to study hours every day, and then it doesn't happen. You go, well, I'm not going to study at all. Just don't do that. Like, it's okay. You miss a day and that's fine. You just get back on the next day. So if that's your problem, just practice extending a little bit of grace to yourself. More practically, what I would do would be I would use shorter study intervals, like I talked about, where I do the Pomodoro thing, where I do 25 minutes. Um, that can really help on those days you're like super tired. And you're like, man, I can't even begin to think about sitting here for 3 hours and reading about this stuff. You don't have to. You just have to start your first Pomodoro and see what happens. That's your goal. Okay. And then maybe beyond that, maybe in your process oriented goals, if you do find it really helpful to touch the material every day, which I get, I was that way, you just say the only thing I have to do every day is I have to get my 1 25-minute Pomodoro. And maybe you couple that with what you think is an achievable overall study goal. Maybe you say, yeah, 15 hours a week. I feel like I can make progress with 15 hours a week total. Or maybe it's 12, or maybe it's 20. I don't know, whatever it is for you, that's going to allow you to make progress and maintain momentum. So that's the weekly goal. But every day, all I got to do is touch it. I got to get in here and I got to look at this material. I got to read for 25 minutes. I got to bang out 2 or 3 practice problems. But know that if you fall short every once in a while, that's okay. Just get back on the horse the next day. That's how I'd approach that problem personally. I hope that helped, and if it didn't, let me know and I'll try again, I guess. Anonymous says, any chance we can go back to the slide about your study area setup? I finally got the app to work at that point and had only been connected via phone call up to that point. Oh boy. Okay. You can see the silly picture of my cat. There we go. Yes, that'll work. It's not the most information dense slide. I think this is the one you were talking about, but Shaban, I apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. Question regarding the path to select Ruby or JavaScript or Python. Up to you. You can be successful regardless of the one that you pick. This has been one of these questions that, like, I know that Chris, the founder of Launch School, has answered hundreds of times, right? And so if you type in Launch School, which path, you're going to get articles about it. My recommendation is that if you don't have a really strong feeling. Like a student earlier when during the introduction was talking about how she was like kind of excited by Ruby. She's kind of interested in a few things about Ruby, and so, dude, study Ruby then, right? Like if that's the one you're jazzed about, it's okay. Do that. You're not making a decision of like, I am going to only be a Ruby developer. I have to choose now what kind of language I'm going to work with my whole life and my whole career. No, 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 no. Your which language is going to be your first one? And the one where you sort of learn how to learn a coding language, because a lot of these things are actually sort of like conceptually you almost language agnostic. And so if you learn variable scope in Ruby, it's a lot easier to learn variable scope in JavaScript and a lot easier to learn it in Python, or iteration, or how variables operate as pointers or don't operate as pointers. Like you learn that in one language and then it's way easier to learn it in another. So you're just making a choice. What is my first language? It's not what language is the right one. Yeah. The other thing I would say, if you're gearing towards Capstone, you're like really ambitious about that. Python right now is used in Capstone. Don't hold me to that. I'm pretty sure. And so if you learn Ruby, you learn Ruby backend, you learn JavaScript in the front end, and you get into Python, or you get into Capstone, you learn Python. That's pretty cool, right? Also, if you learn Python, if you take the Python track, you also learn JavaScript. Okay. If you learn Ruby, you learn JavaScript. If you do JavaScript, you only learn JavaScript. So it's a little bit shorter. So if you have time commitment is the thing, you're like, oh, I only have a couple months and I really got to learn this material. Maybe just do JavaScript. Otherwise, pick one of the other two. Okay. I hope that was enough information for you. Eric says, is working on a side project that is related to the course material frowned upon because the possibility of going down the rabbit hole? What are ways that have personally made the study fun for you? Um, I don't have an official answer on that. I actually don't know what launch school stance is on sort of side projects. I would say, look, if you're not doing anything crazy, like I would take issue with it if you're like, oh, I'm doing this project. Let's say you're an RB 101 or something, but this project requires you to know SQL and understand databases. Well, you don't learn that until 180 something. And so now you're trying to learn that plus the course material. I think that could be problematic. But if you're sort of like, oh no, I'm learning these basic Ruby things and I'm building basic Ruby side projects and I'm not trying to learn Ruby on Rails. I'm not dealing with databases. I'm not dealing with networking concepts yet. I think that's okay. Um, what are ways that have personally made the study fun for you? Just getting better. Honestly, like it's fun to focus on the thing and to get better and to have those moments where you go, oh man, okay, that's how that works. I find that personally satisfying. And so I lean into that instead of like, I almost thought that like projects early on were discouraging for me because like I would very quickly butt up against my knowledge. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't do anything cool yet. And so I just would get frustrated. Whereas if like, no, if the wins are like, oh, I learned this thing that's in the material that Launch School has curated and put in front of me and said that I'm ready to learn. And that's where I get my satisfaction. That actually worked better for me. Okay, so Daisy says, wanted some clarification. Um, oh, somebody said you don't see anything bad on the slide. There you go. There's the bad thing on the slide. Okay. Daisy says, wanted some clarification on when you were talking about your personal approach to studying, when you're doing your pass-throughs, um, do you move on to the next assignment, lesson, quiz, etc., even if you don't understand the material yet? Do you master the lesson before moving to the next lesson? Okay. So on my first pass, I just read the material. I don't write any summaries. And if I really am just trying to be like, oh, okay. Like I read it and I go, ah, pointers. Okay, neat. And I just move on. That's not mastery, but I get exposure to it. That's the point of the first pass. The second pass, I will not move on until I understand it because I'm going to read the assignment about variables as pointers, if that's the example we're using. Um, and then I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write a summary of that. And usually what would happen is I would start it and then I'd be like, wait a minute, what was that whole thing about, you know, addresses in the computer's memory? Wait, well, there was something there, and I got to go back and reread it and fill in all the gaps. And so by the time I do that whole process, I have my summary, and boy, do I know the material in that assignment. Okay. Do you have any different study techniques to retain what we study? Considering I have a limited time of 2.5 hours per day, all 7 days. I tell you what, 2.5 hours a day, every day. What is that? Oh man, math. What is about 15 hours, give or take. Um, that's pretty good. You know what I mean? Like 15 hours a week, like you're able to make progress. Most people are going to be able to make progress on 15 hours a week. And so I don't have any specific study techniques for that. I would just say try a few different study techniques, find the couple that feel good to you and that you can execute on and that help you learn. I gave, I don't know, a couple dozen in here. Pick a couple of them, try them out. If they feel like they work, keep doing them. And if they don't feel like they work, find some other ones. I have some people who love flashcards and they have a particular approach to flashcards. I tried to do flashcards. I found it was like tedious, busy work to me. I hated it. And so I don't do flashcards. You know, my long form summary things, people go, they look at, I have, at the end of a course, I probably have a 70-page document that I wrote. And people look at that and they go, that's insane. What are you doing writing all this? But it works for me. And so I just do that. Um, so yeah, I would say experiment with a couple different approaches. When you find one that like you're like, oh wow, okay, that felt like a good use of my time. Keep it in the rotation. But I think 2.5 hours a day, 7 days a week, like that's a healthy amount of studying. So you should be fine. Uh, Okay. Maxim says, do we need also to work on projects portfolio during launch school? No. So as you go through the curriculum, you will build a few increasingly complex projects. Like some earlier projects will be something like a calculator, you know what I mean? Or tic-tac-toe. You'll build these sort of like one file or two file little projects that are going to be fun. You can get a code review on them and stuff. The end of the front end, or I'm sorry, the end of the back end curriculum is a pretty big project assessment. It would be what I would consider the first like non-trivial project. You're gonna have databases, you're gonna have encryption, you're gonna have a lot of this kind of stuff. And so you'll get there, but I would not, there's no particular reason, certainly not a rule or anything like that, that you should be building additional portfolio projects on the side of launch school. That's not really the point of launch school, is to I think there are a lot of like boot camps. This is just my understanding, maybe I'm wrong about this, who sort of the point is to get you to a point where you're like, I could build this thing, and you have sort of a portfolio, and you're like, you couldn't really sit down and tell anybody about how it works, and you didn't learn the material deeply, but like, look, I built this thing. Launch school is almost the opposite of that, where it's like you're drilling the fundamentals. So you really, really understand it, and then suddenly, like you can sit down and you can build like a real non-trivial project and then sit there and give a presentation about how it works, even though for months and months and potentially a year you haven't really been building big stuff. You've been learning the fundamentals. That's more of the launch school stuff. So, all right, everybody, that's all the questions, I think. Anybody have anything else? No. Well, this was a lot of fun, everybody. I appreciate y'all coming out, spending this time with me and allowing me to spend this time with you. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm on Slack and stuff like that. Um, yeah, but please fill out that feedback form. It's in the chat if you want to click on it. Let me know how I did. I would appreciate it. Everybody have a good evening or a good afternoon or day or whatever time it is wherever you are in the world. Y'all take care, okay?